My name's Ted Lee, and I'm one of the national armorers for the USFA. I also sit on the FIE Semi-Commission, which deals with technical matters. I've been a middle-level manager for 3 different Olympics, numbers of world championships, NCAA national championships, and all sorts of other events. So basically, I've done everything from being a line armorer in national events and local events, all the way up through the highest levels of the sport. In 1975, the Olympic trials were held in Jersey City State College. And I went there to just see what was happening and actually met Joe Burns at that particular event. He had his toolbox spread out on a table in front of him, and having just gone through and repaired or tried to repair a closet full of bad fencing equipment, I decided to ask him exactly how to do it. And that's what started everything. Well, I'm competing against myself to see if I can do it more efficiently, quicker, or better. The challenges constantly are changing. Back in the bad old days of the 1970s, you'd go to a competition and you'd be fixing reels and scoring machines. Now, with technological improvements, it's almost never the scoring machines and almost never the reels, and it's mostly personal stuff. Being invited down to the Sydney Olympics in 2000 to manage their control, that's probably one of the things, because normally countries who host Olympics want to use their own people. To invite me down there and some other U.S. people was quite an accomplishment. We had just run the Olympics in '96, and my roommate for that turned out to be the assistant competition manager in Sydney. So we got along fine, and they didn't have the technical expertise in Australia at that time, so they decided to import some talent. I think the NCAA national championships are the most fun because it's really 4 days and you're getting to know the fencers, and there's very little to do because you can watch the fencing and talk with the fencers. If you go to some of the big events, such as the World Championships, there's huge amount of video. You've got video replay on video walls, and everything is basically in real time. You don't have to wait for things because as soon as a round's over or a DE's over, somebody pushes a button and the scores and the instant replay, they're all available. So it's really quite a production now. It's not just a competition. Cheating in the amateur levels, and especially less than things like world championships, is relatively rare, very infrequent. There was an instance last year where somebody had rigged a body cord so that in saber, so that they could not be hit. And it was controlled by somebody in the stands. So during testing, of course it worked. Of course it worked. Of course it worked. But when it came to actual combat, couldn't get a hit. So they decided to take a look at everything. And upon taking apart the body cord, they found the device. And that's the impetus for the clear body cord ends. Well, epee is the one that seems to be the one that everybody plays with. You've got things like people putting clear nail polish on their points, half of the point, so that when you test the guard on your opponent, you use the unvarnished side of the tip. But when you hit with the other side and it goes off. And obviously, since you've tested it before, that hit's going to stand. Other tricks that people have done is to have extra wire wrapped around the post in their socket, and when it comes time to fence, they just unwrap some of it and create a short between the A and B sockets. Those are the two most obvious ones. Foil and saber, you've got the situation where part of the circuit is in your opponent, and if you want to score touches, you have to touch that opponent. Now, there are ways of blocking touches, and they involve your body cord, most likely having a high resistance in your A line, the clip line. But if it's properly constructed, It's almost impossible to do that. I think in today's age, it's a lot harder to do that because as soon as somebody gets an air touch, that epee is going to disappear essentially. It's not going to be used in competition. It's going to be confiscated and examined. Well, probably the most interesting one was when I was called to strip the World Championships in Sofia, Bulgaria. And I wasn't even working for the house at that point. I was just the U.S. team armorer. And I was called to the strip to check out a suspect epee that had just produced an air touch. And the result of that was a 1-year suspension to the fencer for having an illegal switch in his epee. In the initial control position of the wiring under the pad and connecting into the socket, that's all examined. And the rules that have evolved foster that. You know, for instance, the idea of the mouse hole, the two wires coming up through the mouse hole, now they have to come up through separate mouse holes if they come up through them. They can still come up behind the socket, but if they're in front of the socket, it's rejected. Other things, the reason why referees look under the pad and the use of transparent pads in epee is to see what's happening with the wires there. Are they in a position, are they set up so that there could be a short, sort of a trigger under there? So the rules have evolved to prevent a lot of that. I think the attitude has gone down since across the world, you don't have a lot of countries, specifically the Soviet Union, putting a huge emphasis on winning. You know, you had East Germany, you had Russia, or the Soviet Union, you had Cuba, who had huge premiums placed upon winning. And if you won, by whatever means, you could get a new car, you could get a job for life, your family was well taken care of, new apartment, etc. But that's all gone down since the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1990. Well, there are still countries that back their athletes financially. There are a lot of national federations which basically run the sport. They run the clubs, they sponsor people to go to competitions, but there's no huge incentive as there used to be 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. The instances that I have seen of people cheating were directly related to those countries where they incentivized winning to a very large degree. Actually, the biggest problem is people's equipment not working. The weights that are provided by the organizer supposedly are all checked and within tolerance, but not necessarily. I can remember an instance in Mexico City where there was an epee weight that was being used that would, it was over 1,200 grams. And obviously everybody's epee springs, right brand new, right out of the package, were failing. But there was nothing we could do about that weight until it was summarily kidnapped and placed in how shall we say, quarantine for the duration of that particular competition. If you have a weight from a reputable dealer, it's going to be certified. If it's a homemade weight, who knows? So you've got to stay with the weights that are from reputable dealers. Buying equipment, you've got to figure out a couple of things. Number one, what's your price point? Number two, what level of safety do you want? Obviously, the level that you want that's going to give you the safest protection is all FIE gear. It protects you and it protects your opponent, but it's going to be very expensive. Other than that, the level one, which is done by most reputable manufacturers, and they label their equipment as level one, is perfectly sufficient for most people. In getting a mask, you have to make sure that the mask fits and that if it has a metal tongue on the back, that is properly adjusted so that it contacts the entirety. The tongue, all of the tongue is against the back of your head. Sometimes people make just one bend and you've got this flag hanging out the back, which isn't good. Other than that, you just have to make sure that the uniform, the glove, are free of holes, have tight seams, no fastenings that don't work, and you'll be fine. In the modern sport of fencing, injuries are relatively rare, although there are still serious possibilities for injury. The biggest and most dangerous is obviously a broken blade. And in most instances, well, I should say in a lot of instances, it's due to people locking up on their foil or their saber or their epee, and especially with orthopedic or pistol grips that have a tendency to make people make a fist, and they try and punch people with a locked arm. That's where you get a lot of blade breakage, a very real prospect of somebody having a puncture wound, or possibly, depending on where, you could have something like a ballistic snap of the blade, which will slice. Over the years, there have probably been a dozen that I know about. Well, actually, fencing is one of the safer sports. It's much safer than cheerleading, for instance. But when you think about competitive cheerleading and you've got people doing aerials, there are a lot of injuries there. One of the things is that the steel that's used in the blades has become much more consistent. And especially with the advent of the miraging blades, they break less frequently. They still will break, but they are a lot stronger and a lot more durable. Theoretically, they are supposed to break on a blunt end, and most of them do. But occasionally you get one that comes out and it's got a sharp spur on it. In the late 1980s, there was the mandating of the use of the FIE level uniform on the international level, and more that is filtered down into the local levels. Number one, improvement of materials. They're no longer using Kevlar, which was the first synthetic material. Now they're using ballistic nylon, which creates a much lighter uniform. People can move faster in it. It's much more comfortable. I think that one of the things that's happened, and it might be the natural evolution of equipment and training and all sorts of things, is that it's become faster and much more athletic. Also, the advent of a lot of television and instant replays have made actions accessible to people who aren't highly trained in seeing them. For instance, the standards for testing blades and flexibility of blades has changed. The electrical fencing for saber, which was instituted in 1989, has made it much more accessible to the audience. There's an national armor, who had a shirt that read, "It's your body cord, stupid." But that was before we were actually checking body cords before national events. Since then, the number of strip calls involving body cords has gone down, as well as people knowing how to diagnose their own problems. But still, such things as a loose fit of pins into the guard socket causes problems, and people need that diagnosed. Well, obviously, if everybody came in with absolutely perfect equipment, there'd be no long lines and control. The other thing that would be very nice would be, and this is happening in a lot of the big internationals, is that all of the scoring machines are interconnected to a central server. So at the end of a round or a DE bout, button is pushed and immediately the next event, whether it be a DE bout or the next pool, it's all listed, posted, and ready to go. The technology exists. What's not in the works is the economics. If you're going to interconnect all of the 60 machines, for instance, in a NAC, to wire all of those into a central server is going to be very expensive. It's labor intensive to set it all up. If we had a national site that had everything built in, such as the German fencing center at Tauber-Bischofsheim, there'd be no problem. But since we have the traveling circus that we call the NAC, you'd have to customize every single network for every single venue that you went to. And that would probably take a week to 2 weeks of people laying cables. Everybody thinks that wireless is going to be a nice solution if and when it works. Problems are hit detection, whether the hit is valid, and in other cases, what hits are not valid, such as an epee and grounding. How about the grounding of the epee guard? That's one of the big problems. If you hit the guard on an epee, that's obviously not part of the strip, right? So that's going to be a Bluetooth signal. Most of the things that haven't worked basically are self-eliminating. There was an idea, dealing with the problem of grounding an epee for a wireless system where you'd have a wire that went from your epee guard down to the sole of your shoe, and that would ground to the strip. And of course, the problem is what happens if somebody's in the air and jumping or flushing. No contact with the strip. Oh, well, we can fix that by having a memory in there. Yeah, now it's getting really complicated. Another one which seems to have gone the way of extinction is the idea of the clear front masks. The certification of the visors themselves was a problem ultimately, but as somebody said, plastic seems to destruct explosively. It's there one second, and the next minute it's totally gone. You get no warning. And that happens with Lexan, it happens with Plexi, it happens with all the high-strength plastics. There was an ad saying, take away 30% of the target area on your head. Get one of our masks, But I think there is a certain wisdom in actually getting rid of them. At the end of the run of the clear front, the visor masks, they were actually devising a test using ultraviolet, and you could just see the hidden stress cracks in almost all of them. Not good, because any one of those could just totally destruct at any moment. Okay, obviously, if I wanted to make one very simple statement, is understand how it works and how to fix it. Other than that, if you need to, find somebody who's local who knows how to fix it. The Cyrano's Place video on simple armoring. That's a good place to start. I'll probably continue to do it as long as I can be of service to somebody, or they throw me out. Yeah.